Two young sisters disappeared on a day the world was erased by a blizzard. No witnesses, no struggle, just an unnerving quiet, and a single hand-carved bird left lying in the snow. A weary sheriff, haunted by a promise he couldn't keep. A Belgian Malinois, his breathing ragged but his spirit unbroken, pursuing a trail that logic said was impossible. Deep within an abandoned loggers' camp, under the shadow of a forest that held its secrets tight, they would find more than just the missing girls. They would uncover a forgotten sketchbook, a sigil carved into ancient trees, and a conspiracy that a town had long since buried. This is the story of how a promise, a memory, and one devoted dog brought justice to a community that had forgotten how to hope. Tell us where you're watching from, and may this story bring a sense of purpose and light to your time here. Cedar Hollow was the kind of town that vanished in winter, tucked away in the rugged Klamath Mountains of Northern California. Its modest homes and rustic storefronts, usually bustling with loggers and local artisans, now stood silent under a sky the color of lead. The first blizzard of the season had swept in without warning, burying the roads in feet of powder, muffling the world into a deep and profound silence. Elena Rojas wiped a dusting of flour from her apron as she guided her daughters toward the Cedar Hollow Community Hall. The scent of yeast and sugar from her bakery, the morning loaf, clung to her coat. At 32, Elena possessed the quiet strength of someone who had learned to build a life from scratch. She was petite but sturdy, with warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a practical, thick braid. A widow since a logging accident took her husband 5 years prior. Her world had since revolved around her two girls and the rhythm of rising dough. Maya and Clara skipped ahead, their matching cobalt blue parkas bright against the snow. Maya, the elder at 7, was the protector, her dark eyes watchful and serious. Clara, at 5, was a whirlwind of untamable curls and breathless laughter, her small hand clutching a wooden bird she had carved with her grandfather's help. Elena watched them vanish inside the hall for the town's annual Winter Craft Day, the sound of happy children and space heaters a muffled comfort. She took a moment, her breath pluming in the frigid air, and felt a familiar, baseless anxiety. Just the storm, she told herself, shaking it off before heading back to the warmth of her bakery. By mid-afternoon, the blizzard had become a whiteout. It was then that the call crackled over the radio. Sheriff Ben Carter was staring into the fire in his small, isolated cabin, nursing a mug of black coffee. He'd moved to Cedar Hollow 2 years ago, trading a detective's shield in the chaos of Los Angeles for the quiet order of the mountains. He'd come seeking peace after a case involving a missing child had gone horribly wrong, a failure that had etched itself behind his eyes. At 41, Ben was tall and lean, with the weary posture of a man who carried more than his own weight. His dark hair was short, his jaw set, and a faint scar traced the line of his chin. His only constant companion was Shadow, a 9-year-old Belgian Malinois with a coat the color of burnt embers. The dog was officially retired from K-9 duty after suffering severe smoke inhalation during a wildfire rescue years back. His lungs were scarred, making exertion in the cold a painful, wheezing effort. But Ben saw him as his partner, a silent witness to the ghosts they both carried. The dispatcher's voice was strained. 2 girls missing from the community hall. Maya and Clara Rojas. Last seen near the back exit around 1:15 p.m. The building was secure, no signs of a break-in. Just a set of small footprints that led to the edge of the ironwood forest and then nothing. Ben didn't hesitate. He pulled on his heaviest coat, gave a low whistle, and Shadow rose from the hearth rug, his gait steady despite the rasp in his breath. Within 15 minutes, they were at the hall, where a frantic circle of parents and volunteers stood helpless against the storm. Elena was there, her face a mask of controlled terror. She wasn't screaming. She was scanning the tree line, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Ben began his sweep. The children's coats were gone. This wasn't a case of wandering off. Near the fence, half buried in a drift, he saw it. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, its paint slightly chipped. He knelt, his gloved fingers brushing the snow away. He looked at Shadow. The dog was already working, nose down, body tense. His breathing was labored, but his focus was absolute. He began to move, a dark shape against the blinding white. Ben followed. The trail led them toward the ironwood forest, where old logging roads disappeared into the unforgiving wilderness. Shadow pushed forward, his chest heaving. Suddenly, he stopped, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Ben swept his flashlight beam across the ground. Beneath a thicket of manzanita, the snow was disturbed, trampled down as if someone had waited there, and there was a faint, sharp scent under the clean smell of pine. Antifreeze. Someone had parked a vehicle here, hidden from the road. They were taken, Ben said, the words stolen by the wind. Across town, in a small cabin overlooking the valley, Arthur Vance watched the local news crawl on his television screen. Arthur was 74, a retired fire lookout with hands as gnarled as pine roots and eyes the color of a winter sky. He'd lived alone since his wife passed. His only connection to the world, the crackle of his radio, and the memories he kept locked in a cedar chest. The report mentioned a detail that made his heart stop. A small, carved bird found at the scene. His breath hitched. 5 years ago, his granddaughter, Elise, had vanished while mapping old-growth trees in the ironwood. She was 19, a budding artist and naturalist, fierce and full of life. The official report concluded she'd been caught in a flash flood, her body swept away, but Arthur never believed it. Elise was too careful, too respectful of the forest. He stood, his old joints protesting, and made his way to the cedar chest in the corner. Inside, beneath folded wool blankets, was Elise's last sketchbook. He opened it, the pages filled with detailed drawings of flora and fauna. And there, on a dozen different pages, were sketches of the same wooden bird. It was her signature, a mark she left on things she loved. His hands trembled as he flipped to the back. A detailed drawing of a twisted, ancient pine tree, and beneath it, a strange symbol etched into the bark, a spiral with a single, straight line through it. He'd called it her forest sigil. Underneath, in her neat script, she had written, "Mr. Thorne said the old paths are dangerous. Told me to stick to the maps. But he doesn't know I saw the markings. He's hiding something. Thorne, Marcus Thorne, the former regional forestry director, a man who had retired abruptly right after Elise's disappearance, citing health reasons. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, settled in Arthur's stomach. He grabbed the sketchbook, pulled on his coat, and stepped out into the blizzard. Deep in the forest, Maya Rojas blinked awake to the smell of rust and damp wool. The room was dark and freezing, the only light filtering through a grimy, cracked window. She was in an old logger's bunkhouse, the walls lined with empty, rotting beds. Her wrists were loosely tied with a coarse rope. She turned and saw Clara huddled on a moldy mattress, wheezing, her small face pale in the gloom. "Maya," Clara whispered, her voice raspy. "I can't breathe good." Panic flared in Maya's chest, but she pushed it down. She remembered her father telling her stories about how sound travels through metal and water. She shuffled closer to the wall, found a loose floorboard, and saw a rusted iron pipe running beneath it. With her heel, she began to tap a steady, rhythmic beat against the pipe. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. The sound was faint, but it was something. Miles away, through the howling wind, Shadow stopped dead. He lifted his head, his ears swiveling. Ben paused, listening, but heard only the storm. The dog, however, had heard it. Not a sound, but a vibration through the frozen ground. Pattern. He let out a single, sharp bark and lurched forward, renewed. Ben followed, his hope, which had been fading, now a burning ember. They were getting close. He pulled out his thermal monocular and scanned the ridge ahead. Trees, snow, rock, and then a flicker. A faint heat signature emanating from a dilapidated structure nearly invisible against the hillside. The old Blackwood logging camp, abandoned for decades. He zoomed in. 2 small heat signatures, one fainter than the other, and 2 larger ones moving. He had found them. But as he watched, He saw one of the larger figures dragging a heavy tarp from a hidden truck. This wasn't a simple kidnapping. This was something else entirely. Something colder. The wind whipped down the gulch, carrying the scent of pine and impending violence. Sheriff Ben Carter lay flat in the snow, the icy crystals biting at his cheeks. Through the thermal monocular, he watched the two men at the abandoned bunkhouse. One was thick-set and pacing, the other wiry and nervous. Shadow was a statue of coiled muscle beside him, his breath a low, controlled rasp. The blizzard was their cover, but it was also their enemy, erasing tracks and chilling the girls to the bone. Ben had tried his radio. Nothing but static. The storm, or maybe something more deliberate, was jamming the signal. He was alone. Inside the bunkhouse, the air was thick with fear and the metallic scent of rust. Clara's wheezing had grown worse, each breath a desperate, shallow gasp. Maya held her, whispering the story their mother always told them about the brave little hummingbird who flew through a storm to find the sun. But her own voice was shaking, her hope wearing thin. The door creaked open, and the thick-set man stepped in. He wore a stained parka and his face was grim. He looked at Clara, then swore under his breath. "She's gettin' worse. The boss ain't gonna like this." He tossed a half-empty bottle of water at them. "Drink. We're moving you as soon as this blows over." He turned and left, bolting the door from the outside. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "Moving us where?" She went back to her tapping, faster now, a frantic prayer against the cold metal pipe. Meanwhile, Arthur Vance had made it to the sheriff's station, his face chapped raw by the wind. He slapped the sketchbook down on the dispatcher's desk. "My granddaughter Elise. She didn't die in a flood," he said, his voice hoarse. "She was silenced, and it's connected to those missing girls. It has to be." A young deputy, wide-eyed, took the book and immediately recognized the gravity of what he was holding. He put out an all-points bulletin for Marcus Thorne, the former forestry director, flagging his name in the system. Back on the ridge, Ben watched as the wiry man came out of the bunkhouse, his face pale. "She can barely breathe, Mick," he said. "This is messed up. We should just leave them. And have them point us out?" Mick, the stocky one, sneered. "Thorne said no witnesses. That was the deal. We wait for his call, and we do what he says." Thorne. The name hit Ben like a physical blow. He remembered the cold case file on Elise Vance. Thorne's name was in the periphery, but there was never enough evidence to connect him. Now it was all clicking into place. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a cleanup. Thorne was tying off loose ends, and these little girls had stumbled into the middle of it. He knew he couldn't wait. He checked the single spare magazine for his pistol. One chance. He looked at Shadow. The dog's intelligent eyes were fixed on his, waiting for the command. Ben gave a silent, two-fingered signal. Stealth. They moved like ghosts down the slope, using the trees and drifts for cover. As they neared the bunkhouse, Ben saw his opening. A boarded-up window with a rotten frame. He worked a hunting knife into the wood, prying a board loose just enough to see inside. He saw Maya curled protectively around her sister, her small face a mask of fierce determination. Just then, Mick's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, and his face went hard. "Got it." He hung up and turned to his partner. "Change of plans. The storm's giving us cover. We end it now." Ben's blood ran cold. He didn't have another second. A sharp, furious bark shattered the silence. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war. Shadow exploded through the rotted window frame in a shower of splintered wood and glass. He hit Mick mid-stride, jaws clamping down on the man's arm, pulling him off balance with a savage twist. The man screamed, a sound of shock and pain. The wiry man spun around, pulling a long hunting knife. Ben met him in the doorway, using his momentum to slam him back against the wall. The knife flashed, and Ben felt a searing pain rip through his thigh as the blade found its mark. He ignored it, drove his elbow into the man's throat, and brought him down hard. Inside, Shadow had Mick pinned, his low growl a constant, terrifying promise. "Call him off," Mick shrieked, his arm bleeding freely onto the dirty floor. "Drop your weapon," Ben ordered, his voice tight with pain as he limped into the room, his own gun leveled. The man's eyes darted from Ben to the dog, and he let his pistol clatter to the floor. Shadow released his grip but didn't back down, standing guard over the whimpering man. Ben holstered his weapon and fell to his knees beside the girls, his leg threatening to buckle. Blood was soaking through his pants. "It's okay," he gasped, pulling a thermal blanket from his pack. "I'm the sheriff. You're safe." Maya stared at him, her eyes huge and dark, then pointed a trembling finger. "Clara," she whispered. Ben saw the blue tinge on the little girl's lips and knew they were out of time. He scooped Clara into his arms, wrapping her in the blanket. "Maya, hold on to my belt. Don't let go." He half-carried, half-dragged them out into the blizzard. Shadow limped beside them, bleeding from his own cuts but never taking his eyes off the surrounding forest. Just as Ben felt his vision start to gray at the edges, he heard it, the faint, approaching whine of a siren. Guided by Arthur's map and a prayer, a deputy's truck was fighting its way up the logging road. He collapsed to his knees as two deputies burst from the truck. One of them, a young woman named Eva, took Clara from his arms and immediately began administering oxygen. Ben looked at Shadow, who licked his hand, and managed a weak smile. "Good boy," he whispered, before the world went black. Back at the sheriff's station, the dispatcher got a hit. Marcus Thorne's vehicle had been flagged at a gas station just south of the Oregon border. He was apprehended without a fight. In his truck, they found unregistered firearms and burner phones. Elise Vance's sketchbook was the key that unlocked it all. He had been using the protected forest for an illegal logging and smuggling operation. Elise had discovered it, and he'd silenced her. The Rojas girls had likely seen him or his men near the old camp by accident, and he had panicked. The emergency lights painted the forest in silent, pulsing waves of red and blue. The blizzard was finally letting up, the snow now falling in gentle, fat flakes that seemed to absorb all sound. The old loggers' camp, a place of secrets and fear, had become a scene of quiet, focused rescue. Clara Rojas was stabilized inside a heated ambulance, an oxygen mask fitted over her small face. Her breathing was still shallow, but the immediate crisis had passed. Her sister, Maya, sat beside her on the gurney, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, refusing to leave her side. She hadn't spoken much, but her eyes, dark and solemn, followed every movement of the paramedics. Elena arrived in a deputy's cruiser, her face pale but her expression resolute. She climbed into the ambulance and gathered both her daughters into her arms, burying her face in their hair. There were no loud sobs, only the deep, shuddering relief of a mother whose world had been returned to her. "I've got you," she whispered over and over. "You're home." On a second stretcher, Sheriff Ben Carter was being prepped for transport. He'd lost a significant amount of blood from the deep gash in his thigh. A medic with calm, practiced hands had applied a tourniquet and was now administering fluids. Ben was conscious but drifting, his skin a waxy gray under the emergency lights. Shadow lay on the snow beside the stretcher, his head resting on his paws. A deep cut on his shoulder had been hastily bandaged, and his breathing was a low, painful wheeze, but he refused to move. When the medics began to lift Ben's stretcher, the dog rose, a low growl in his chest. "He's not leaving him," Maya said softly from the ambulance, her first full sentence since the rescue. The lead paramedic, a burly man with a kind face, looked from the dog to the sheriff, then nodded. "All right, he rides with us." As the ambulance doors closed, the first signs of dawn were breaking over the snow-covered peaks, a thin line of pale gold on the horizon. News of Marcus Thorne's arrest spread through Cedar Hollow like wildfire. Arthur Vance sat in the sheriff's main office, cradling a mug of hot coffee, as the full story came together. Elisa's sketchbook was the undeniable proof that connected Thorne to her disappearance 5 years ago. He had silenced her to protect his operation. Her forest sigil was, in fact, the marker for one of his illegal logging sites. He confessed to everything, his composure finally cracking under federal interrogation. Weeks later, as the first thaw of spring began to melt the snow from the mountains, the town of Cedar Hollow gathered in the central square. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the sound of dripping eaves and the scent of damp earth. Ben Carter stood at the podium, leaning lightly on a dark oak cane. His recovery had been slow, but he stood taller than he had in years. The haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet resolve. He had turned in his resignation, but the town council had unanimously refused to accept it. Shadow sat beside him, regal and proud. The veterinarian had called his survival and performance a miracle, but Ben knew it wasn't a miracle. It was loyalty. Elena and her daughters were in the front row. Maya and Clara presented Shadow with a new collar they had helped make, leather stamped with a pattern of tiny birds. Arthur Vance was there, too. He stood a little straighter now, the heavy shroud of unanswered grief lifted. He had found justice for Elise. Her memory was no longer a ghost. It was a beacon. Courage, Ben said, his voice steady and clear, isn't about the absence of fear. It's about what you do when you're terrified. It's a mother who never stops believing. It's a grandfather who holds onto a memory for 5 years. It's a little girl tapping on a pipe in the dark. He paused, looking down at his partner. And sometimes, it's a loyal friend who will walk into the fire with you, and for you. He then called Arthur to the stage and presented him with a folded flag and a posthumous Civilian Medal of Honor for Elise. Her courage saved 2 more lives, Ben said. Her voice was finally heard. Arthur accepted it, his eyes glistening. He looked out at the crowd, at the 2 little girls who were alive because his granddaughter had been brave enough to draw a picture in a book. Later, as the sun set behind the peaks, Ben and Shadow stood on the porch of the sheriff's station, looking out at the ironwood forest. It was no longer a place of ghosts for him. It was a place of purpose. The town of Cedar Hollow, once a refuge from his past, had become his home. Sometimes, the deepest wounds are not healed by forgetting, but by facing the darkness and finding the light within it. Miracles don't always shout from the heavens. Often, they whisper in the steadfast heart of a dog, in the quiet determination of a lawman who finds his reason to stay, and in the unbreakable spirit of children. In a world that often feels lost, perhaps the greatest truth is that we find our way home by helping others find theirs. If the story brought you a moment of peace, please share it. Let us know in the comments which part resonated with you the most. And remember to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the quiet courage that holds our world together. May you be blessed. May your loved ones be safe. And may you always have the strength to listen for the quietest cries for help. Hope is never truly lost. It just waits for a brave heart to find it.